The casserole was still steaming when my father pointed his fork at me and said the words that ended 15 years of quiet. "All you ever do is take." The table went still. My mother set down her glass. My brother studied his plate like it held instructions. "I'm Evelyn Isbell, 34, an ICU nurse, and for 5 years I had been the reason this house still stood." He didn't know that yet. He didn't know about the folder in my closet, or the payments running under my name, or that in exactly 30 days, every bill he never saw would land at once. Where we sit with the quiet people who finally stop carrying everyone else and watch what happens when they set the weight down. If a family ever made you invisible for the very thing holding them up, you'll feel this one. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. People think nurses are saints. We're not. We're just people who got comfortable being calm while everything around us falls apart. I learned it on the floor, where a steady voice keeps a scared patient from spiraling, and I brought it home, where it did the same thing for my family. My apartment sits on the east side of Hadley, Ohio, 15 minutes from the house I grew up in. Small place. 1 bedroom, good light, a closet I kept too organized. Most mornings I came off a 12-hour shift, slept 4 hours, then drove over to my parents' to refill my mother's pill organizer and fix whatever had broken that week. A leaking trap, a dead smoke detector, a property tax notice nobody wanted to open. I never minded. Being needed felt like being loved, and at the time I couldn't tell the difference. That was my weakness, if you want to name it. Not vanity, not some need for applause. The opposite, really. I made myself small and useful and silent. And I told myself that was the same as being good. I kept a folder in that too-organized closet. Manila, soft at the corners, a single word written across the tab in my own handwriting. I didn't open it much. I just added to it, month after month. The way you add stones to a wall without ever stepping back to see how high it's gotten. My coworkers asked once why I never took vacation. I said my family needed me. They traded a look I pretended not to catch. I should have caught it. Because the people who need you the most are sometimes the ones most determined never to admit it. And admitting it, I'd learn, was the one thing my father would burn the whole house down to avoid. It started with my father's back. Raymond Isbell built things for a living. Decks, additions, a whole subdivision off Route 9 back when the town was growing. He was good, and he knew it, and his knowing it was the load-bearing wall of his whole personality. Then a scaffold gave out 5 years ago, and a disc in his spine went with it. The surgeries helped his legs and ended his trade. 60 was too young to stop being who he'd always been, but his body didn't ask. The disability checks came slow and small. The mortgage did not care. I remember the night my mother called me, her voice doing that bright, breakable thing it does when she's terrified. The bank had sent a word she kept repeating like it might soften. Default. I was 29, 3 years into steady nursing pay, no kids, no mortgage of my own. So I did the math at my kitchen table and made a decision I never announced. I called the mortgage company and set up a recurring payment, drawn straight from my own account each month, enough to keep them current. I didn't frame it as charity. I framed it as nothing at all. I told my mother the bank had worked something out, which was true in the sense that I was the something. My father never asked how the house got saved. A man who has just lost the thing that made him a man does not go looking for the person who quietly replaced him. He simply lets the relief wash in and calls it luck, or God, or his own old foresight. I let him. I thought I was protecting his pride. Looking back, I was feeding the exact belief that would one day be used against me. The wall was getting higher. I just kept adding stones. 3 years ago, my sister got into college. Brooke was 17 then, all nerve and hope, the first Isbell to fill out an application without flinching. The acceptance came in spring. The price came right after. State school, in-state rate, and still a number that made my mother go quiet and my father leave the room. There was no fund. There had never been a fund. So I called the bursar's office on my lunch break, stood in the hospital stairwell where the cell signal worked, and set up another automatic payment. Tuition, each semester, drawn from my account. I asked one thing of the woman on the phone. Send the receipts to my address, not the family's. She said that was unusual. I said my family liked surprises. What I actually liked was a father who could tell the neighbors his youngest was college material, without a single dollar of his own behind it. He started saying she had a scholarship. I never corrected him. My mother repeated it at church. Brooke believed it too because, why wouldn't she? 18-year-olds don't audit their own good fortune. They just say thank you to the air and keep walking. I let her keep walking. I told myself the secret was a gift, that knowing would only make her feel like a burden, and Brooke had spent enough years feeling like the afterthought in a stressed house. I wanted her light, so I paid for it and stayed in the dark, and I genuinely believed that was love in its purest form. Maybe part of it was, but a secret kindness has a way of becoming a secret debt, and the person keeping the books is always the one who eventually gets called a thief. My brother Travis is the kind of man who walks into a room like he's been announced. 38, charming, a handshake for everyone and a plan for nothing. Growing up, he got praised for having that leader thing, and somewhere along the way he decided the appearance of carrying weight was easier than the carrying. He didn't lie, exactly. He just lived 3 months ahead of his own bank account. That spring he came home with a new idea, the way he came home with a new idea every spring. A garage, his own shop, fixing trucks, a real business this time. He needed seed money, just a cushion, just to get the lease signed. He pitched it at Sunday dinner with both hands moving, and my father, glowing for the first time in months, turned to me and said the words that always followed Travis's dreams. Help your brother out. Here's what nobody at that table understood. The money my father gave Travis didn't come from my father. It came from the same gap I'd been quietly filling. On top of the mortgage, I moved extra into their household account every month for the other bills, and that cushion was the only reason there was ever anything in there to give. When Dad handed Travis a check, he was handing him my money and feeling generous doing it. I knew it. I'd known it for a while. And for the first time, sitting there with the gravy going cold, I didn't reach for my checkbook right away. I said I wanted to think about it. The table noticed the pause. My father's smile thinned at the edges, just slightly, the way ice thins before you hear it crack. I told myself I was being responsible. What I was actually doing was, for the first time, declining to disappear. And this family had never forgiven anyone for that. A week later, I tried to do it the right way. I drove over on a Tuesday, sat my parents at the kitchen table, and suggested we look at the finances together. All of it, out loud, no secrets. I even had a soft plan. Move the mortgage payment and the tuition into their names, with my help layered on top, so they'd see the real shape of things and feel some ownership again. I thought my father might be relieved to understand the machine that had been keeping him afloat. I was wrong about that, the way you can be wrong about someone you've known your whole life. He didn't even let me lay it out. He waved a hand like I was offering to reorganize his garage. "We've got it handled," he said. "We always have." My mother nodded along, fast, the way she nods when she needs a sentence to be true. And here's the part I want you to sit with, because it matters later. I had a finger on the right move. I almost transferred the tuition that very week. But the bursar's billing cycle was mid-semester, and switching the paying account then risked a lapse that could drop Brooke's classes before the new payment cleared. One administrative gap and my sister loses a semester. So I held off. Not because I trusted my father, because I refused to gamble with Brooke's enrollment to make a point. I left that house with the plan still folded in my purse and the word handled echoing in my ears. We've got it handled. We always have. I would think about that sentence a month later, standing in a room full of relatives, watching it come apart in real time. I just didn't know yet how far my father would go to keep believing it. The dinner that broke it open was a Thursday in October. Nothing special on the calendar, which is how the worst nights usually arrive. My mother made the green bean casserole she makes when she wants everyone agreeable. Travis was there, glowing again, because the garage lease had a deadline and the cushion had run thin. He brought it up between bites, light and certain, like the money was a formality that had simply gotten delayed. He looked at me when he said it. They all did, eventually, the way you turn toward a faucet when you're thirsty. I set my fork down. I kept my voice even, the floor voice, The one I use when a monitor starts screaming and panic would kill the room. "I think we need to slow down," I said. "I'd like to actually look at the numbers before anyone signs anything." That was all. No accusation, no tally of what I'd spent, just a request to stop pretending the well was bottomless. But in that house, asking to see the books was the same as calling everyone a liar. My mother's smile froze. Travis sat back, wounded, performing the wound before he'd even decided to feel it. And my father went very quiet, which in Raymond Isbell is louder than shouting. He set his own fork down to match mine. He looked at me across the casserole and the candles my mother lights for no reason, and I watched something old and bitter rise behind his eyes. I had spent 15 years making sure this man never had to feel small, and he was about to make me pay for every single one of them in front of his wife and both his other children, with words I would hear in my sleep for a year. "All you ever do is take." He said it slowly, like he'd been saving it. "You've never done a thing for this family." The candles kept burning. My mother looked at her lap. Travis found something fascinating in his water glass, and Brooke, home for the weekend, went pale and still, a girl watching weather she didn't understand. I want to tell you, I had a speech ready. I didn't. 15 years of receipts, and not a word of defense came to me, because some part of me had always known this was how the story would end, and you can't argue with a verdict you've been quietly expecting. My father wasn't finished. He leaned in, and his voice dropped to that flat, certain register men use when they're sure the room is theirs. "If you had any self-respect," he said, "you'd leave. So leave." The cruelty of it wasn't the words. It was the confidence. He genuinely believed it. In his version, he was the provider, defending his table from an ungrateful daughter. And the belief was so complete, it left no door for the truth. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say his name, to say anything. She didn't. She just kept folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. So I stood up. I didn't cry, and I didn't raise my voice. I folded my own napkin and set it beside my plate, the way you leave a room you intend to leave clean. "Okay, Dad," I said. "That's it." A quiet answer against all his noise. I thanked my mother for dinner, picked up my coat, and walked out into the October dark. The screen door clapped shut behind me. Inside, I imagine, there was a held breath, then relief, then the soft return of conversation. Outside, I sat in my car and did not start it for a long minute. Then I drove home and opened the closet. People think walking away is the weak move. That night, I learned it can be the loudest thing you'll ever do if you know exactly what you're walking away from. Stay with me, because the quiet part is where everything turns. And if you've ever been told you give nothing by the very people you gave everything to, comment "I see you" below and subscribe. The drive home is 15 minutes, and I remember almost none of it. Streetlights, the bridge over the creek, the turn onto my street. My hands did the work while my head replayed the same sentence on a loop. "All you ever do is take." I wasn't angry yet. Anger needs space, and I was still too full of the table to feel anything but the echo. I let myself into the apartment, stood in the dark with my coat still on, and listened to how quiet a place gets when you live alone and nobody is depending on you for the night. Then I thought about the payments. Every one of them. Still running, still scheduled, still drawing from my account at the start of each month like a heartbeat I'd forgotten I was keeping alive. The mortgage, the tuition, the little overflow that became my father's generosity. All of it under my name, set up by me, controlled by no one else on earth. I didn't decide anything in that moment. I want to be honest about that, because the version where I drove home plotting revenge isn't true and isn't me. I just took off my coat, walked to the closet, and reached for the folder I'd been adding to for 5 years without ever once laying it all out on the floor. I told myself I only wanted to look, to remember, to hold the proof of my own life in my hands after a man I loved told me it didn't exist. I sat down on the bedroom carpet and opened the tab marked with a single word: family. And what spilled out wasn't a plan. It was a record. But records, I was about to learn, have a way of becoming verdicts of their own. I spread it across the carpet in rows, because nurses chart things, and charting is how I think. 5 years of mortgage assistance, each payment stamped and cleared. 3 years of tuition confirmations from the bursar, every semester paid in full. My name in the account line. A folder within the folder for my mother's medical bills, the ones from her gallbladder surgery, and the ongoing blood pressure medications I refilled without comment. And the smaller slips, the cushion, the seed money that became Travis's checks and my father's pride. I added it up. I'm good with numbers. It's half my job, and even I had to do it twice. The total was the kind of figure that buys a house outright in this town. I had spent it in pieces so small that no single one of them ever felt like a sacrifice, which is exactly how you give away years without noticing. I sat there on the floor and felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not even sadness, really. Clarity. The cold, clean clarity you get when a diagnosis finally explains every symptom you'd been writing off. I hadn't been taking from this family. I had been the family's quiet circulatory system, and they'd mistaken the absence of pain for the absence of me. My father said I'd never done a thing. The carpet said otherwise, in rows, in dates, in cleared transactions that didn't care about his pride or my silence. I gathered the papers back into their stacks, careful, the way I handle anything that matters. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I only knew that the lie had a shape now, and I'd finally seen all of it. And once you've seen the real shape of a thing, you can't unsee it. You can only decide whether to keep holding it up. I want to be clear about what I decided, because it would be easy to call it revenge, and revenge was never the word in my head. Revenge is loud. Revenge wants an audience and a confession. What I felt that night was simpler and colder than that. I had been told, plainly by the head of my family, that I took and never gave. Fine. I would stop giving the things only I was giving. Not to punish them. To make the words true in the only way words like that can ever be tested. If I had truly never done anything for this family, then nothing would change when I stopped. The mortgage would keep getting paid by whoever had been handling it. The tuition would keep clearing on its mysterious scholarship. Travis's cushion would refill itself from wherever cushions come from. My father said they had it handled, they always had. So I would let them handle it. I would not announce a thing. I would not send a single bitter text or stage a single scene. I would simply remove my hand from the wall and let the family discover, on the ordinary schedule of due dates and late notices, exactly how much of the structure had been me. It was the most honest thing I could think of. It was also, I knew even then, the most devastating, because the truth arriving slowly is so much heavier than the truth shouted. I opened my banking app. I found the recurring payments, the ones I'd set up alone, in my name, with no one's signature but mine required to end them. My thumb hovered over the first one, the mortgage. I thought about my mother, and I almost stopped. Then I thought about her napkin, folded into smaller and smaller squares, and I didn't. I didn't cancel everything in a blind sweep. That's not how I do anything. I went down the list like it was a med pass, deliberate, double-checked, no errors. The mortgage assistance? Off. The household cushion? Off. My mother's medical autopay? Off. Though that one cost me a breath. And the tuition. The tuition I handled differently, because there was one person in this story who had done nothing but believe a kind lie, and I would not let her take the hit meant for the people who told it. Before I stopped the payment, I called the bursar's office the next morning. Same stairwell, same bad signal made good. I asked for the exact drop deadline, the date after which an unpaid balance would pull a student from her classes. I wrote it on my hand in pen like I was a teenager again. Then I made sure the current semester was fully cleared, paid through, safe, before I turned off the recurring payment for the next one. Brooke would finish her term. She would not lose a single class in the fall. What she would lose, in the spring, was the illusion, and that was a debt the adults in her life had run up, not me. I set it all in motion in under an hour, sitting at my kitchen table in scrubs I hadn't changed out of, coffee going cold. When it was done, I felt the strangest thing. Lightness. Not joy. Nothing so clean as joy. Just the specific relief of setting down a weight you'd carried so long you'd stopped feeling your own arms. I closed the laptop. Somewhere across town, a clock I couldn't see started counting down toward a stack of envelopes nobody in that house was prepared to open. And I went to sleep better than I had in 5 years. The strange thing about pulling the floor out from under a house is how long it takes anyone to fall. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The payments I'd stopped wouldn't come due until the cycle turned, so the family went on exactly as before, blissfully standing on air. My mother texted me 4 days in. Not an apology, a casserole sentence. You know how your father gets. Come for Sunday dinner. We'll forget all about it. Forget all about it. As if a cruel remark and an open door were a spilled drink. I read it twice and set the phone face down. I didn't reply that day. When I did, I kept it warm and brief, the way you'd answer a coworker you don't trust. I said I needed some time. I asked how she was feeling. I did not say a word about money, because no one had, because no one yet had a reason to. That was the eeriest part of those weeks. The silence wasn't peace. It was a fuse, lit and burning down inside the walls where nobody could see the smoke. Travis posted a photo of the empty garage bay. Coming soon, tagged like a man certain his cushion was eternal. Brooke sent me a meme about midterms and I sent back a heart, because she'd done nothing wrong and didn't deserve my distance. My father said nothing at all, which was its own kind of message. He had drawn his line and he expected me to crawl back over it, contrite, the way I always had. He didn't know the ground he was standing on had already been sold out from under him. He'd find out the way everyone in that family was about to find out everything. On paper, in the mail, right on schedule. There was an envelope in the folder I hadn't let myself open in 2 years. It was at the very back, behind the receipts, the paper gone soft as cloth. My grandmother's handwriting was on the front. Just my name, the old one, the one only she used. Evie. Grandma Ruth was my father's mother, and she was the one person in that family who ever looked at me and seemed to see the whole picture. She died 2 years ago in the spring, with her mind sharp to the last week, and she left me this letter with her lawyer along with a small sum I'd quietly folded into, of course, the family. I'd read it once at the funeral and put it away, because grief made the words too heavy to hold. That night on the carpet, with everything else laid bare, I finally opened it again. Her hand was shakier than I remembered, but the voice was all hers. She wrote that she knew. She'd always known what I was doing for the house, even when no one said it out loud, because she'd done the same thing for her own family once, and she recognized the particular tiredness it puts in a person's eyes. And then she wrote the line I would carry into every room for the rest of this story. Evie, take care of them if you can, but don't you ever let this family make you small so they can feel big. Love isn't proof that you owe them everything. I read it 4 times. I pressed my thumb against the ink like I could feel her through it. For 5 years, I'd believed that disappearing into my family's needs was the highest form of love. My grandmother, who had spent a lifetime learning the cost of that belief, was telling me from the other side of the grave that I had it exactly backwards. I folded the letter into my purse. I would not leave it behind again. Brooke texted me the next afternoon, and it nearly undid the whole plan. Not because she was cruel, because she was sweet and clueless, and 17 still living in the corners of her 20-year-old self. She'd gotten an A on a biochem exam, the hard one, the one she'd been dreading. I actually understood it this time, she wrote, with 3 exclamation points and a photo of the marked-up test. Then, underneath, the line that stopped my breath. Honestly, thank God for that scholarship. I'd be so lost without school right now. Thank God for that scholarship. There it was. The lie repeated by the one person who'd never told it, who'd only inherited it, the way kids inherit the weather of a house without ever choosing it. I sat with my thumb over the keyboard for a long time. I could have told her right then. One message and the illusion was gone, but I thought about what that would do, how it would land, how she'd feel knowing the sister she idolized had been paying for her future in secret while their father called that same sister a thief. It wasn't mine to drop on her in a text between classes, so I did the only thing I could live with. I sent her a heart, and then I sent, "So proud of you. You earned that grade, scholarship or not." Both things were true. She earned the grade, and the scholarship was no more real than my father's foresight. I put the phone down and felt the weight of what I'd set in motion, because in the spring, when the next bill went unpaid, Brooke was going to learn all of it at once, from a stranger in a billing office, and there was no version of that morning that wouldn't break her heart a little. I just had to make sure it broke the right way. Travis, meanwhile, did what Travis always does when he senses the ground shifting. He got louder. My father's 65th birthday was coming at the end of the month, and Travis decided it would be the event of the season. Not a dinner, a party. The whole extended family, the Isbell aunts and cousins, the neighbors who'd known Dad since the subdivision days. He booked the back room at Caruso's, the nice Italian place out by the highway, the one people use for graduations and anniversaries. He talked about a slideshow, a toast, a chance, he said, to show everybody the family's doing great. He said it to me on the phone like nothing had happened, like I hadn't been told to leave my own father's table 2 weeks earlier, because in Travis's mind the fight was already over, and I'd already lost. He needed me there, partly, I suspected, because some piece of him knew who actually funded the family's doing great. He floated the costs like a man who'd already spent it. The deposit was down, the menu was chosen. He'd figure out the rest, which in Travis speak meant someone else would. I listened and said almost nothing. He was building a stage, a big, public, well-lit stage, in front of every relative whose opinion my father had spent his whole life managing, and he was doing it on credit that ran straight back to a cushion that no longer existed. I didn't tell him that. I just asked when it was and wrote down the date. Because here's the thing about a man who throws a party to prove his family is fine. He has no idea he's just scheduled the exact moment the truth will choose to walk in. The invitation arrived in my mailbox 4 days later. Cream cardstock, gold script. My name, handwritten. They wanted me there. They had no idea what they were inviting. I held that invitation for a long time. Cream cardstock. My name in my mother's careful hand, the same hand that had folded a napkin into squares while her husband threw me out. Part of me wanted to send it back. A bigger part wanted to skip it entirely, to let the bills do their work while I stayed safely on the far side of town with my new, light, terrible quiet. Going felt like volunteering for an ambush. Then I took out my grandmother's letter and read it again, the way I'd started doing every night. Like a prayer for someone who didn't pray much anymore. Don't you ever let this family make you small so they can feel big. And I understood something. Staying away would be a kind of smallness, too. It would let them write the ending without me, cast me as the daughter who sulked off and abandoned them, the thief who slunk away when the money got tight. If I wanted the truth to stand up straight, I had to be in the room when it did. Not to fight. I had no speech, no plan to grab the microphone. I just needed to be present, calm, undeniable, when the numbers everyone had ignored finally raised their voice. So I decided to go. I'd wear something nice. I'd bring a gift even, because he was still my father and the man who taught me to drive a nail straight and check my work twice. And I'd bring one other thing, folded quiet in my bag, just in case the night went the way nights like that tend to go. I marked the date on my calendar and underlined it once. 3 weeks out. 3 weeks for the mail to do what mail does. I had a feeling the timing would be just about perfect. It was. I wasn't going to that party to fight. I was going to be in the room when the numbers finally spoke for me. There's a difference between revenge and just stopping the bleeding, and I'm still not sure which one this was. Tell me in the comments what you'd have done. Then stay close, because the mail was already on its way. The notices landed the way I knew they would. Not all at once, but close enough to feel like an avalanche to the people who'd never seen the snow building. The mortgage company moved first, a past due notice, then a second one stamped in red, then a phone call. My mother let go to the machine 3 times before she answered. The bursar's office sent Brooke's spring balance with a due date and a polite, unmissable warning about enrollment. And the medical billing service, the one I'd quietly fed for 2 years, started its own slow drumbeat of statements addressed to a household that suddenly had no idea why the bills it never used to see were appearing on the kitchen counter. For the first time in 5 years, my parents were looking at the real numbers, the actual shape of the life they'd been living, the mortgage they thought was worked out, the tuition they thought was scholarship. The cushion they thought was just there, the way air is just there, until it isn't. I heard about all of it secondhand, because I hadn't called and they hadn't either, not yet. My Aunt Margaret mentioned it on the phone, worried, fishing. "Your folks okay over there? Your mom seemed real shook at church." I said I wasn't sure, which was technically true. I didn't know the inside of that house anymore. I only knew what I'd stopped feeding into it, and I could picture the rest. The confusion first. Then the blame, looking for a door to walk through. I knew which door it would choose. It always chose the same one. Me. I just waited, and I let the envelopes keep coming, because I had decided weeks ago that I would not say a single word until the truth was sitting on a table where everyone could see it. My mother finally called on a Wednesday night. Not my father. Him calling would have meant admitting he needed something, and Raymond Isbell would sooner sink than signal. So it was Lorraine, my mother, her voice doing the bright, breakable thing again, only thinner now, stretched over something close to panic. "Evelyn, honey, I think the bank made a mistake." A mistake? I closed my eyes and let her talk. The mortgage people were calling. Brooke's school sent something about her account. And there's all these doctor bills, I don't even understand them. I think someone stole our information. It would have been so easy to be cruel, to say the word scholarship back to her and watch it land. I didn't. I kept my voice level, the floor voice, the one that doesn't flinch. "I'm sorry you're dealing with all that," I said. "I don't know anything about a scholarship." And that was true. There was no scholarship. There never had been. I wasn't lying to her. I was simply, for the first time, declining to lie for her. She went quiet on the other end. I could hear her doing the math she'd avoided for 5 years, the slow arithmetic of a woman starting to suspect that the mystery keeping her family afloat had a name and a face, and had been sitting at her Thanksgiving table being told it took, and never gave. "Evelyn," she said finally, careful now. Were you?" And I didn't answer that either. Not on the phone. Not where it could be denied or twisted or buried under, "You know how your father gets." Some truths have to be delivered in person, on paper, in front of witnesses, or they never get believed at all. "I'll see you at the party," I said gently. "We can talk then." And I hung up before she could ask again. Travis, predictably, did not handle the strain like a man who'd ever carried any. With the bills piling up and the cushion gone, his garage lease deadline came and went, and the deposit with it. He started making calls, the kind of calls that begin with, "Hey, weird question," and end with someone politely declining. The party at Caruso's quietly shrank. The back room became the living room. The catered menu became "Your mother's cooking," which everybody loves anyway. He spun every downgrade as a choice, intimate over flashy, family over fuss, but you could hear the seams. And then he did the thing I'd been waiting for. The thing men like Travis always do when the floor tilts. He went looking for someone to blame, and he found me. He called, and there was no charm left in it. "I don't know what you said to Mom," he started, "but this whole thing fell apart the second you decided to get petty." Petty. I almost laughed. He told me I'd abandoned the family over a comment at dinner, that I was punishing 2 old people because my feelings got hurt, that real family doesn't keep score. Real family doesn't keep score. From the man whose entire life was a tab someone else kept paying. I let him talk. I'd learned, on the floor, that you don't argue with a patient who's coding, you just work the problem. So I worked it. "I hope the party's nice," I said when he ran out of accusations. "I'll be there." And I hung up, and I sat with the ugly little truth of it. He still didn't know. None of them did. Not really. Not yet. They felt the cold, but couldn't name the missing warmth. They were all just 3 weeks from a room where it would finally have a name, and the name was going to be mine. Brooke found out before the party. I'd hoped to control how she learned it, but a billing office doesn't care about your timing. She logged into her own student billing portal first, the one she'd never had a reason to open, and the whole payment history was sitting right there under her name. No scholarship, no grant. Every semester marked paid in full by a recurring payment from an outside payer. When she finally called the bursar's office to make sense of it, the tired woman on the other end only confirmed what Brooke was already staring at on her own account. The payer on file was listed as Evelyn Isbell, and the recurring payment had been discontinued effective the spring term. My sister called me that night, and I knew the second I heard her breathing. Evie. Just my name, the way Grandma used to say it, and then it all came out in pieces. The phone call, the woman's voice, the name on the account. Her own name, attached for 3 years to a lie she'd repeated with exclamation points and gratitude to the sky. "It was you," she said. "The whole time, it was you." And Dad said, she couldn't finish it. She didn't have to. We both knew what Dad said. "All you ever do is take." She started to cry, the deep kind, the kind that's half shame, and I felt my own chest crack open, because none of this was hers to carry. "Brooke, listen to me," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were a kid. You believed your parents. That's not a crime." But she kept circling it, the horror of having been the one I gave the most to, and the one who'd parroted the cruelest lie back without knowing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. And there it was, the question I'd dodged for 3 years, finally asked by the one person who deserved an answer. I gave her the only one I had, because I loved you, and I thought love had to be invisible to count. I was wrong about that. Grandma told me so. Here's a thing I have to be honest about, because the easy version of this story flatters me and the real one doesn't. Before Brooke understood the whole shape of it, before the bursar's office spelled it out, she sent me a text in a panic that I will never forget. It came the morning the spring balance posted, an automated alert hitting her student portal. She didn't know yet that it was me. She only knew her tuition, the tuition she thought was free, had a balance and a deadline and a warning, and she did the natural thing. She reached for her sister. "Evie, why did my tuition suddenly stop? There's a balance, and they're saying I could lose my classes. I'm freaking out. What do I do?" I read it standing in the hospital break room, still in my scrubs, a cup of bad coffee going cold in my hand. And for one long moment, every quiet year rose up in me at once. Every receipt, every stairwell phone call, every time my father called me a taker while spending my money, every time my mother said scholarship in a voice full of pride that belonged to me. I typed my answer slowly. I didn't rage. I didn't explain. I just sent back the truest sentence I had, the one that had been waiting 5 years to be said. I thought I never did anything for this family. Then I set the phone face down and went back to work, because there were patients who actually needed me, and a monitor down the hall that mattered more than my father's pride. I'd find out later that Brooke read it, didn't understand, called the bursar, and learned the rest. But that one line went out into the world first, my father's own cruelty, handed right back to him, and I have never, before or since, felt a sentence land with that much quiet weight. You'd think the truth getting out would have softened them. It didn't. It hardened them, the way pride does when it's cornered, and they did the thing wounded families do best. They closed ranks and picked a villain, and the villain was, of course, me. By the time the week was out, the story had been rewritten in that house. I wasn't the daughter who'd carried them in silence. I was the daughter who'd set them up, who'd made them dependent on purpose, so I could yank it all away and humiliate them. My father reportedly said I'd been buying control for years, which is a remarkable thing to say about money you spent without knowing it existed. Travis amplified it, glad to have a narrative where his own emptiness wasn't the headline. Even my mother, who I think knew better, let herself be carried along because the alternative was facing what they'd done to me, and facing it was harder than blaming me for it. And then they made their decision. The one I'd half expected. They would handle it at the party, in front of everyone. My father, backed by Travis, would confront me before the whole extended family, lay out my betrayal, and let the room deliver the judgment. They were so sure the relatives would side with them. The ungrateful daughter, the put-upon parents, the cut-off support. It's a story people love until they see the receipts. And that was the part they hadn't thought through, the part that made me almost pity them. They were planning to put me on trial in a crowded room, never once considering that I might bring evidence. They thought they were setting a trap. They were building me a courtroom. And they'd handwritten me an invitation to it. Gold script. My name. Please come. I intended to. The night before the party, I did not write a speech. I still had no intention of announcing anything. The Bills had been doing that quiet work on their own for weeks, and that had always been the plan, to let the truth arrive on its own schedule and stay out of its way. But the family had made a different choice. They'd decided to put me on trial in front of every relative they could fit in that living room, and I was not going to walk into an ambush with empty hands. If they were going to drag the conversation into a crowded room, I would simply be ready to answer it with a record instead of my temper. I've sat through enough family confrontations to know that speeches lose. They sound rehearsed, and rehearsed sounds guilty, and a calm woman with paper doesn't need to perform. So instead of words, I gathered documents. I went back to the folder on the carpet and pulled the cleanest, plainest proof of each thing. The mortgage assistance ledger, 5 years of cleared payments, my name in every account line. The bursar's statements, 3 years of tuition, paid in full. The private payer listed in black and white. The medical billing records. And a single summary page I made myself, because I'm a nurse, and we put the vitals at the top of the chart. One sheet, every category, every total, no commentary. Just numbers. Numbers don't get flustered. Numbers don't raise their voice. I slid them into a plain folder, nothing dramatic, a manila twin of the one in my closet. And then I added the last thing, the thing that wasn't evidence at all. A copy of my grandmother's letter, folded soft, tucked behind the rest. Not to read aloud, just to keep near my heart in a room where I'd need to remember whose granddaughter I was. I laid out my clothes like it was a shift. Something simple, dark, the kind of thing you can't be condescended to in. I went to bed early and slept, actually slept, because I wasn't anxious, and I want you to understand why. I wasn't walking into that party to win an argument. I was walking in to set a weight down in public once, so it could never be picked up and used against me again. The truth was already true. I was just going to let everyone see it. In the morning, I made coffee, put the folder in my bag, and drove out to Caruso's. They'd moved it back to the house after all, which somehow made it worse and better. Worse because the living room I grew up in was packed wall to wall with relatives, and there's no neutral ground in a room that watched you learn to walk. Better because home is where truth has the least room to hide. Aunt Margaret hugged me at the door, too tight, her eyes asking questions her mouth wouldn't. The Isbell cousins were there, the neighbors from the old subdivision, a sheet cake with 65 in blue gel on a folding table. My father sat in his recliner like a throne, accepting birthday wishes, healthier looking than he'd been in months, and I understood that the party was as much medicine as celebration, a man surrounded by proof that he still mattered. Travis worked the room in a blazer, refilling drinks, steering the evening toward whatever moment he and my father had planned. I could feel it coming the way you feel weather. I didn't rush it. I found a chair near the edge, set my bag at my feet, and said hello to people who'd known me since I was small. My mother avoided my eyes from across the room, busying herself with napkins and trays, unable to land anywhere. And Brooke. Brooke came and sat beside me without a word, close, her shoulder against mine, a 20-year-old planting her flag in full view of everyone, and I have rarely loved her more. We didn't talk. We didn't have to. She'd chosen, and her choosing was its own quiet thunder. I watched my father laugh at something a cousin said, and I felt no anger, only a strange, steady calm. He'd built this stage to put me on trial. He had no idea he'd be the one cross-examined. The candles were lit. It was almost time. It started with a toast, because of course it did. Travis tapped his glass, gathered the room, and began the speech he'd clearly been polishing. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about family, about sticking together, about how this past month had tested them. And then he turned the knife the way he'd always planned to, smoothly, smiling, eyes finding me at the edge of the room. Some people, he said, think family is something you can just walk away from when it gets inconvenient, when the bills get hard. A few heads turned. My father shifted in his recliner, sitting up, color rising, ready. "We've had a rough stretch," Travis went on, "because somebody decided to teach us all a lesson. To cut us off. To punish two people who gave her everything. And there it was." He gestured at me, gentle and damning, the prosecutor resting his case. My father took it from there, because he couldn't help himself. Because the rage had been waiting weeks for a room this size. He pushed up out of the recliner, pointed a thick finger across the heads of his relatives, and his voice filled the house I grew up in. "She abandoned us," he said. "Her own parents. Cut off her own family and left us drowning, and for what? Because I hurt her feelings at dinner?" He looked around for agreement, and he found the soft, uncertain quiet of people who don't have all the facts. "All she ever did was take," he said, slower now, savoring it. The same old verdict, the daisy cutter he'd been swinging my whole life. And the one time we needed her, she proved it. The room held its breath. Brooke's hand found mine and gripped it, and I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. That's the part I want you to hold on to, because it's the part that mattered. I stood up in my father's living room with 30 relatives watching, and I spoke at the volume you'd use to tell someone their coffee's ready. "You're right that I stopped paying," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I did stop." My father's chin lifted, vindicated, the room leaning his way. And then I bent down, opened my bag, and took out the folder. "I just think everyone should know what I stopped paying. I didn't throw the papers. I didn't wave them. I walked to the folding table with the sheet cake, and I set them down one at a time, like dealing cards, naming each as it landed. This is the mortgage on this house, 5 years, every month, from my account. A statement face up. This is Brooke's tuition, 3 years, every semester. There was never a scholarship. It was me. Another, face up." A sound moved through the room, low, the sound of 30 people recalculating at once. "These are Mom's medical bills, the gallbladder surgery, the blood pressure medication." Face up. "And this is the cushion in the household account that Dad gave to Travis. That was mine too. He was handing out my money and calling it his." I set down the summary page last, the one with the total at the top, vitals first, and I stepped back. "You said you always had it handled," I said quietly. "These are the payments that handled it. Every one of them under my name. So yes." I stopped. "Because a month ago, at that table, you told me I'd never done a thing for this family." Aunt Margaret had picked up the tuition statement. Her hand was at her mouth. The papers were moving now, passing hand to hand around the room, and with every pair of eyes that dropped to the numbers, my father's face lost a little more of its certainty. He looked for the first time in my life, afraid. My mother broke before my father did. She'd been standing near the kitchen doorway, a tray of something forgotten in her hands, and as the papers went around, she set it down on the counter very carefully, like it might shatter, like she might. And then she started to cry. Not the bright, breakable performance I knew, but something rawer, something that had been held under for 18 years. "I'm sorry," she said, and it wasn't to the room. It was to me. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry." The relatives went quiet around her. "We should have told her the truth a long time ago," she said, the words tumbling now, unstoppable. "About the money, about all of it." She looked at my father, then at the cousins, then back at me, and she confessed the thing I'd suspected for years but never been able to prove. When she was 16, we had her college fund, and Travis got in trouble, real trouble, money he owed to people you don't want to owe, and we used Evelyn's fund to make it go away. All of it. A murmur went through the room. Travis stared at the floor. And we never paid her back. We never could. And every year she did more for this family, it just reminded me of what we took from her, so I told myself it was small. I called it little favors. Because if it was little, then what we did to her was little too. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. It wasn't little. None of it was little. She rebuilt the very thing we stole from her, and we let your father call her a thief. It was the most honest my mother had ever been, and it cost her everything to say it in that room. I didn't hate her in that moment. I just felt very, very tired and very seen. My father did exactly what I knew he would. He exploded. It was the only move left to a man whose entire identity had just been laid face up on a folding table next to a sheet cake. He couldn't argue the numbers, so he attacked the only thing he had left, the narrative, and he did it at full volume. "You did this to humiliate me," he roared, and the recliner rocked as he came up out of it. "In my own house on my own birthday, you brought all this to embarrass me in front of my family." His face was red, his hands were shaking, and the louder he got, the smaller he looked, because the room had already seen the proof and his volume couldn't bury it. Relatives shrank back. Aunt Margaret put a hand on his arm and he shook it off. He was a man drowning in a flood he'd insisted didn't exist, and his only response was to yell at the water. And I stayed calm. That's the inversion. That's the whole thing, the part I'd promised myself in the car. I did not match him. I didn't need to. I let him be loud and I stayed quiet, and the contrast did all the work that shouting never could. When he finally ran down, breathing hard, glaring at me across a room full of stunned relatives, I answered him at the same low volume I'd started with. "No, Dad," I said. "I didn't pay so I could humiliate you. I paid so you would never have to feel humiliated. For 5 years, every neighbor who thought you were doing fine because of me. You just never knew it was me." The silence after that was the loudest thing in the house. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I wasn't finished, but what was left wasn't an attack. It was a closing. I looked at my father standing there with his fists slowly opening, and I felt the last of the old fear leave me, the fear that had kept me silent and useful and small for 15 years. "A month ago," I said, "you told me that if I had any self-respect I'd leave. So I did. I left. Quietly. I didn't argue, I didn't make a scene, I just did exactly what you asked. I let that sit. The only thing I took with me was my own name off of payments I'd set up myself. And the bills? Dad? The bills are just the sound of you finding out what I was actually carrying when I walked out that door." I reached into my bag one more time. Not for evidence this time. I took out my grandmother's letter, the soft-folded one, and I held it but didn't open it, because some things you don't read aloud to a crowd. "Grandma Ruth knew," I said, and I watched my father flinch at his mother's name. "She knew what I was doing for this family, and she left me a letter about it before she died. She told me to take care of you all if I could. But she also told me not to let this family make me small, so the rest of you could feel big." I looked around the room, at the cousins, the neighbors, my weeping mother, my silent brother, my sister's hand still tight in mine. "I'm done being small," I said. That's all this was. Not revenge, just me, finally, standing up straight. And I set the letter back in my bag, and for the first time in my life, my father had absolutely nothing to say to me. The room had turned, and everyone in it could feel the new direction. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody booed my father or threw a drink. It was quieter and more final than that. It was the way Aunt Margaret moved to stand beside me instead of him. The way the cousins who'd been nodding at all she ever did was take now couldn't meet his eyes. The way a neighbor set down the tuition statement he'd been holding and said, softly, to no one in particular, "My God, Ray, she saved the house." The story my father had spent a month building, the ungrateful daughter, the put-upon parents, collapsed in the space of 10 minutes. Not because I'd shouted it down, but because I'd simply set the truth on a table and let the room read it for themselves. Travis had gone gray and silent in his blazer, the master of ceremonies with no ceremony left to master, and I almost felt sorry for him, the way you feel sorry for anyone caught standing where the tide goes out. My mother crossed the room and put her arms around Brooke and me both, and the three of us stood there in the middle of that living room while the party reassembled itself into something else around us. My father lowered himself back into his recliner, looking older than he had an hour before, looking, finally, like a man who'd run out of story. I didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat about. I hadn't won a war. I'd just stopped losing a quiet one I'd been losing my whole life. Brooke leaned into me and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Evie." And I told her the truth. You don't owe me an apology. You never did. You were the one good thing I'm proud I paid for. Here's what happened after, because I know you want to know, and because the after is where the real boundary got built. I didn't cut my family off. That was never the point. Cutting them off would have been just another way of letting my father's words define me, the taker who finally took everything away. Instead, I did something harder. I put everything in the light. Brooke's tuition I kept paying, but directly, to her, out loud, with her knowing every dollar. She took a part-time job at the campus library anyway, not because I asked, but because she wanted her own skin in it, and I let her, because that's what dignity looks like when it's still young. The mortgage I would not simply resume. I sat my parents down, the two of them, no Travis, no audience, and I laid out terms like the professional I am. The payment would move into their name, with a financial counselor we'd see together, and whatever help I gave would be a decision I made each month as a free person, not a debt I owed as a hostage. My father didn't argue. He signed where the counselor pointed, quiet, humbled in a way I'd never seen, and once, only once, he looked up at me and said, "Thank you, Evelyn." Cracked and rough and real. It wasn't an apology, and I didn't pretend it was. But it was the first time in 15 years he'd acknowledged out loud that I'd given him anything at all, and I decided to let that be enough for now. Travis moved out by spring. No garage, no empire, just a regular job an hour away, and a lot less to say at family dinners. We're cordial. That's all. And that's fine. My mother and I are slowly finding each other again. Two women who spent too long folding themselves into smaller squares, learning out loud how to take up space. And Grandma Ruth's letter lives in my nightstand now, not the back of a closet, where I can reach it on the nights the old smallness tries to creep back in. I still work the ICU. I still keep a steady voice while everything falls apart. But I don't disappear into other people's needs anymore. I help when I choose to, and I let it be seen. That, it turns out, was the lesson the whole expensive decade was trying to teach me. Love doesn't have to be loud to be real, but it should never cost you the right to be seen. That's where I'll leave it, at a birthday table where the quiet finally added up. The folder marked family, the tuition that stopped, the cruelty that started it all, and the truth I sent back. If someone has made you feel like you gave nothing while you were giving everything, you don't have to shout to set the record straight. You just have to stop holding up a wall that was never yours alone and let them see what you were carrying. Set your weight down with dignity, not noise. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs it, comment "I see you," and subscribe to